I used to think age softened people, that the older you got, the kinder the world became. It doesn't. It only gets quieter, and in that quiet, you hear things you never noticed before. The pauses in your children's voices when they call, the careful politeness that covers impatience, the way a sigh sounds almost like waiting. For months now, I'd felt that waiting thickening around me like fog. My name is Hassan, 72, retired civil engineer, once proud of building bridges that still carry strangers across rivers I no longer visit. My wife passed 6 winters ago. Since then, my house had become an archive of noises, ticking clocks, creaking chairs, and lately, footsteps that never stayed long. It began with my eldest son, Faisal. He started dropping by every Friday, smiling too widely, talking too loudly. "Abba, you're looking strong," he'd say, and then too casually, "Have you given more thought to the property paperwork? Just to make things easier." Later. Such a small word carrying such a large emptiness. Then came my daughter Sarah, with homemade soup and questions wrapped in concern. "Are you remembering to take your medicine? Do you still keep the bank papers in that old drawer?" I smiled, nodded, played the part of the grateful father. But inside, something began to unspool. The love I'd built my life around felt suddenly conditional, fragile as glassware handled by impatient hands. Nights stretched long. I'd sit in my study with the lamp burning low, staring at the photograph of my late wife, Amira. Her eyes still carried that quiet conviction that people were good if you gave them reason to be. I whispered to her once, "Were we wrong to give so much?" The walls, full of her absence, gave no answer. By the 3rd week of Faisal's visits, I started noticing things he didn't realize I saw. How his gaze wandered to the medicine bottles, how he counted them when he thought I was reading. He'd ask too many gentle questions about how I felt, how the doctor said my heart was doing, whether I ever felt lightheaded. The questions weren't cruel. They were careful. That was somehow worse. One afternoon, I overheard a phone call he thought was private. I was in the hallway, he in the sitting room. "No, he's fine," Faisal was saying, voice low. "But the doctor said his condition could change any time. We just need to be prepared." "Yes, I'll talk to Sarah about the will." Prepared. Another small word turned sharp. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through every room, touching the furniture I'd chosen, the books I'd read, the drawings of bridges I'd framed on the walls. Everything felt both mine and already divided. The quiet sympathy in my children's eyes now looked like calculation blurred by guilt. It would have been easy to grow bitter, but bitterness, I'd learned, builds nothing. So I decided to build again, something invisible this time. Not a wall to shut them out, but a structure inside myself strong enough to survive truth. The next morning, I invited Faisal and Sarah for tea. They arrived separately but wore matching smiles of obligation. We sat in the courtyard where the jasmine vines still bloomed. I poured tea slowly, letting silence stretch. "I've been thinking about the future," I said. Their eyes lifted instantly, alert. "About the house, the savings, all that." Faisal leaned forward. "Abba, there's no rush." "No," I interrupted softly. "There is. I don't have forever, and I'd like to see things settled while I'm still sound." Sarah reached for my hand. "That's wise, Baba. We just want what's best for you." "Best for me." The phrase landed like a feather over a trapdoor. "I've decided," I continued, keeping my voice steady, "to make some changes. Nothing dramatic, just a few plans of my own." They exchanged glances. Tiny, involuntary. I almost pitied them. Almost. After they left, promising to support whatever decision I made, I returned to my study and opened a fresh notebook. I wrote on the first page, "If they see only what they can inherit, then I must leave them something they cannot touch." That sentence steadied me. It wasn't anger, it was intention. I began sketching an idea, lines crossing like bridges again. Each stroke returned rhythm to my breath. I remembered a project Amira once dreamed of, starting a community library near the old quarter where children could study without paying fees. We never built it. Life kept happening. Responsibilities always came first. Now, responsibilities were what my children measured me by. Maybe it was time to change that definition. Over the next weeks, I quietly met with a lawyer who'd managed my pension for years. Together we discussed endowments, trusts, and ways to redirect what I owned toward something that might outlive both disappointment and greed. The lawyer, a patient man named Iftikhar, listened without judgment. "Mr. Hassan," he said, adjusting his glasses, "you're not cutting your family out entirely?" I shook my head. "No. I'm teaching them to see value differently, if they choose to learn." When I returned home, a strange calm followed me. It was the first time in months that the silence felt companionable. The jasmine outside had begun shedding petals. They gathered in small drifts like quiet blessings. That evening, Sarah called again, her voice lined with practiced warmth. "Baba, did you rest? You sounded tired earlier." "I did," I said, "and I'm feeling clearer than I have in years." She paused, uncertain. "That's good. Clarity is good." "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. "It always is, especially before decisions." When I hung up, I realized I wasn't lonely anymore. Disappointment can hollow you out, yes, but in that hollow space, something new can echo, resolve, maybe even forgiveness. I didn't know where this new path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. I was not waiting to die. I was finally beginning to live on my own terms. In the weeks that followed, I became a man of habits again, purposeful ones. Every morning I left the house just after sunrise, walking past the old mosque and down the narrow lane where the city still smelled of fresh bread and dust. To anyone watching, I was simply an old man taking his morning exercise. Only I knew each step was a rehearsal for freedom. I started volunteering at a small vocational center near the railway line. It was run by a woman named Nadia, sharp-eyed and endlessly patient. The center taught orphans and underprivileged youth carpentry, accounting, and basic literacy. The first day I entered, Nadia looked up from her papers and smiled. "You're a bit early for registration." "I'm not here to register," I said. "I'm here to help." She blinked, surprised. "You? Why?" "Because I built bridges once," I replied. "And it seems the world still needs them, just a different kind." From that day, I taught geometry to boys who'd never owned a ruler. I showed them how numbers could draw lines that met perfectly if you respected balance. It was a lesson they understood faster than I expected. In their eyes, I saw hunger, not for wealth, but for direction. That hunger reminded me of who I used to be before everything became about what I'd earned. At home, Faisal and Sarah grew more attentive, though not more genuine. They began visiting together now, a small alliance disguised as family concern. They'd bring fruits, tidy my kitchen, even laugh at old jokes as if laughter could erase intent. One afternoon while I was teaching, Faisal called. "Abba, are you home? We thought we'd stop by." "I'm out," I said simply. "Out? Where?" "Helping someone," I replied, and before he could question more, I ended the call. It was a tiny rebellion, but it felt monumental. That evening, when they finally came, they found me writing at my desk. Faisal tried to peer at the notebook, but I closed it with quiet finality. "Abba," Sarah began cautiously, "you've been different lately. Distant. Are we worrying you somehow?" I looked at her. For a moment I almost told her everything, that I'd overheard their plans, that I was redirecting my wealth, that I'd seen through the tenderness stitched with greed. But no, people learn truth best when it arrives not as accusation, but as reflection. "I'm fine," I said, "just thinking more about what matters." She sighed, and Faisal reached for the teapot. His hands trembled slightly. "We just don't want you to make hasty decisions," he murmured. I smiled. "Haste left me decades ago, my son." After they left, I wrote again in my notebook. "Kindness is sometimes mistaken for weakness. Perhaps it's time to let them feel the difference." I wasn't planning revenge. I was building an education. The next week, I met with lawyer Iftikhar again. We finalized the trust, a clean, legal arrangement transferring most of my savings and investments into a foundation bearing Amira's name. The foundation would fund education and small business grants for disadvantaged youth, starting with Nadia's center. "Your children will still receive something," Iftikhar reminded gently. "Yes," I said, "but not everything. They need to understand that wealth without gratitude corrodes faster than poverty." He nodded, understanding more than I said. A few evenings later, Faisal dropped by unannounced. He looked uneasy. "Abba, I met a friend who said he saw you at a lawyer's office. Is everything okay?" I met his eyes. Perfectly. He hesitated, then asked, "You're not changing anything important, are you?" "I'm ensuring what I built doesn't die with me," I answered. "That seems important enough." He didn't respond, just pressed his lips together and nodded. When he left, I watched him from the window. His posture had changed, less confident now, his stride shorter, slower. Perhaps a small part of him feared the truth. Days passed, and the silence between us grew. Sarah visited less. Faisal texted more. I began to suspect they were waiting for me to reveal something, to confess, to rewriting my will so they could prepare their arguments. Instead, I focused on the children at the center. One boy, barely 12, asked me once, "Sir, why do you help us?" "Because someone once helped me," I said. "Who?" I smiled. "A woman who believed in building more than just houses." That night, I dreamed of Amira again. She was standing at the half-built library we'd once sketched together, wind lifting her scarf. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "Let them discover love the hard way if they must." When I woke, the world outside felt sharper, more honest. A week later, I invited Faisal and Sarah to dinner, formally, as if it were an occasion. They seemed relieved, even excited, thinking perhaps I'd come to my senses. The meal was pleasant, almost nostalgic. We talked about old memories, holidays by the sea, the sound of rain on the tin roof when they were children. After dessert, I cleared my throat. "There's something I'd like to share," I said. "I've made some changes to my affairs, but before I explain, I want to ask you something simple." They exchanged wary glances. "Of course," Sarah said softly. "What does wealth mean to you?" The question hung between us, heavy and quiet. Faisal was the first to answer. "Security," he said. "It means freedom from worry." Sarah added, "It means legacy, what we leave for our children." I nodded slowly. "Interesting. You see, I used to think wealth was safety too, until I realized it can also become a prison, one where affection becomes currency." Their eyes shifted. The smiles faded. "Abba, we never—" Faisal began, but I raised my hand gently. "I know," I said. "You never said it aloud. You didn't have to." For a moment, no one spoke. Then I stood and walked to my study. When I returned, I carried a brown envelope. "This," I said, placing it on the table, "explains my decisions. I won't ask you to open it now. Read it later, together." They looked at it as though it might bite. Before they left, Sarah hugged me tightly. I felt her heartbeat, a rhythm too fast to be calm. "We just want you to be happy, Baba," she whispered. "I am," I said. For the first time in a long while. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. The jasmine outside rustled, as if agreeing. Inside the envelope wasn't just legal paperwork, it was a mirror. Whether they'd see themselves clearly in it would depend on how ready they were for truth. I slept soundly that night, a rare, deep kind of rest that comes only when a decision has finally found its purpose. The next morning, sunlight crept across my study table, gilding the edges of the envelope I'd handed them. I imagined it lying unopened on their kitchen counter, its silence louder than any accusation. I didn't expect them to understand right away. Comprehension has its own pace, and guilt often delays it. By noon, Faisal called. His voice carried that brittle politeness that tries to hide discomfort. "Abba, about the envelope. May we come by later?" "Of course," I said. "Come after Asr prayer. The light is better then." He didn't laugh at the small joke, but I did. Sometimes humor is a rope we throw to save a drowning conversation. When they arrived, they looked uneasy. Sarah clutched the envelope as if it might dissolve in her hands. "We read it," she said quietly. "And?" Faisal spoke next, his tone a strange mixture of defensiveness and confusion. "You gave most of your money away, to charity, to a foundation. You're calling it the Amira Trust?" I nodded. "Named after your mother. It supports the school I've been volunteering at." "But what about us?" Sarah's voice cracked.
Did we do something wrong?"
The honesty in her question softened something in me. For the first time, I saw not greed, but fear. Fear of being forgotten, of being replaced in a legacy they'd assumed was theirs. "You're my children," I said. "You'll receive something, but not everything." Because I wanted to give you a different inheritance. Understanding. Faisal frowned. Understanding doesn't pay bills. Abba. No, I replied softly. But neither does regret, and you're close to earning that. Silence stretched between us again. Sarah lowered her eyes. We only wanted to make sure you were cared for. I looked at her, really looked, and saw in her a reflection of my younger self, someone who measured love by control, concern by possession. Then be happy for me, I said, because for the first time, I am cared for by myself. They left soon after, subdued but not angry. I knew their hearts needed time to breathe around the truth. That evening, Nadia stopped by the house unexpectedly. She held a small box of sweets. The children at the center made these, she said. They wanted to thank you. Thank me? I smiled. They've already given me more than they know. She sat down across from me, studying my face. You look lighter, she said. I am, I admitted. But it's a strange kind of lightness, like a man who's been carrying a heavy coat for so long. He doesn't know what to do with his arms when it's gone. She laughed. Then keep walking until your arms remember. Her words stayed with me. 2 weeks passed. No calls from Faisal or Sarah. I didn't chase silence anymore. I let it be a teacher. During that time, the Foundation's first scholarships were awarded. 3 boys and 2 girls, each holding dreams too fragile for poverty to keep alive. When I watched them receive their certificates, something inside me unknotted. But just as peace began to settle, the phone rang one late afternoon. It was Sarah, her voice trembling. Abba, can we come? Please? Of course, I said. You never need to ask permission. They arrived within the hour, pale and shaken. Faisal spoke first. We fought, he said simply. About money, about what you did. It made us say things we didn't mean. And now? I asked. Now, I think I understand why you did it. Sarah's eyes glistened. You weren't punishing us. You were teaching us that love isn't supposed to be earned through inheritance. I felt something warm rise behind my ribs. You learned quickly, I said. She smiled weakly. Not quickly, just honestly. Faisal nodded beside her. I looked at my own children yesterday, he said, and I realized I've been teaching them to measure people by what they can give. You were right. It corrodes everything. There it was, the first glimmer of truth reflected back. I hadn't expected redemption to arrive so quietly. We sat together for hours talking about Amira, about our shared memories, about the years we'd wasted misunderstanding one another. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the road leading there. Before they left, Sarah turned at the door. Abba, can we visit the school one day? The one the Foundation supports? You'd be welcome, I said. It's full of better students than I ever was. When the door closed, I stood in the stillness of the house, listening to the echo of their footsteps fading into the night. I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. A few days later, I walked to the school again. Nadia met me by the gate, waving a piece of paper. They've painted your name on the library wall, she said. The children insisted. I laughed. I hope they spelled it right. She looked at me for a moment, then said, You know, you're changing more lives than you realize. Maybe, I replied. But the first one I changed was my own. As I watched the children run across the courtyard, laughter rippling through the air, I thought of the strange arithmetic of life. We spend years accumulating, only to learn that subtraction, letting go, is what truly multiplies our worth. That night, I wrote in my journal again. I wanted to test their love, but life tested mine instead. And in losing what I thought was control, I found peace. For the first time, I slept without dreams. The following month unfolded like a slow-moving dawn. Everything looked the same from the outside. The cracked veranda tiles, the dusty mango tree, the same cup of morning tea. Yet something inside the house had shifted. Silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like space. Faisal and Sarah began visiting again, this time without the weight of performance. They helped with groceries, repaired a leaking tap, or simply sat with me on the terrace while the evening call to prayer rolled across the rooftops. For the first time in years, our conversations wandered without an agenda. One afternoon, as we sat watching the sky fade from gold to violet, Faisal said quietly, Abba, I went to the center yesterday. I turned to him, surprised. The one you volunteer at. he continued. I wanted to see it for myself. Nadia showed me around. Those kids, they have nothing, yet their eyes are full of light. I think I understand now why you chose them. Sarah nodded beside him. I went too, last week. I helped the girls with reading. They kept calling me Miss Sarah, even though I corrected them a dozen times. She laughed softly, then looked at me. I haven't felt that kind of joy in years. I didn't speak for a long moment. My chest tightened, not from age this time, but from gratitude. Then perhaps, I said, the trust is already paying dividends. They smiled. We stayed there, letting the evening wrap around us like an old shawl. Later that night, I opened my journal again. Love grows best when it stops trying to own. Sometimes you must give away your gold to uncover your heart. Days turned into weeks. The foundation's first library opened, a small building with peeling blue paint and shelves made from recycled wood. On the day of the inauguration, Nadia insisted I cut the ribbon. It's yours as much as ours, she said, but I shook my head. Let the children do it. So they did. 5 tiny hands held the scissors together, laughing as the ribbon fluttered to the ground. Cameras clicked, people clapped. But what stayed with me was the echo of Amira's voice whispering from memory. You finally built it. That evening, Faisal and Sarah joined the celebration. They helped distribute notebooks and served tea. I watched them kneel beside the children, listening, laughing, unguarded, human. It was the kind of wealth no inheritance could buy. After the event, we walked home together. Sarah slipped her arm through mine. Abba, when you're gone, I interrupted gently. Don't rush the story, my dear. She smiled through tears. When that day comes, I just want you to know, we'll keep the foundation alive. Not because it's yours, because it's right, Faisal added. I want my children to volunteer there too. Maybe they'll learn early what took me too long to see. I looked at them both, grown adults rediscovering decency like an old family heirloom, and felt something settle inside me, the knowledge that my lesson had landed. That night, the house glowed softly with lamps. The ticking clock, the smell of cardamom tea, the sound of Sarah humming in the kitchen. Small things, ordinary things, but they stitched the world together again. Before bed, I opened the brown envelope once more. I'd kept a copy of the letter inside, not for legal reasons, but for memory. Reading it now, I realized it wasn't just a letter to them. It had always been a letter to myself, the man who once confused security with love. Perhaps true wealth isn't what we leave behind, but what we awaken in those who follow. As I put the letter away, a strange calm washed over me. It felt like arriving home after a long, unnecessary detour. The next morning, Nadia called. We're starting an evening class for adults, she said. People who never finish school. Would you consider teaching again? I laughed. At my age? At your wisdom? She corrected. So I did. Each evening, I stood before a group of taxi drivers, seamstresses, and shopkeepers, tracing letters on a whiteboard. Watching them write their names for the first time reminded me how every human being carries an unfinished story. One night, after class, I caught my reflection in the window. The man staring back wasn't burdened anymore. He was quietly, stubbornly alive. When I returned home, Faisal had left a small note on my desk. Abba, thank you for giving us something better than money, a chance to be decent again. I placed it beside my journal, turned off the lamp, and whispered into the dark. That's all I ever wanted. The wind moved through the trees outside, and for the first time in years, it didn't sound like goodbye. Months passed, marked not by calendar pages, but by the rhythm of ordinary kindness. The library smelled of new paper and possibility. My evenings belonged to the adult class, my mornings to quiet walks along the canal where herons stood like pale statues in the mist. Sometimes Faisal joined me. He no longer spoke of business. Instead, he pointed out constellations, or the progress of the jacaranda blossoms. I never noticed how peaceful this place is, he said once. You see it when you stop chasing noise. Sarah had started mentoring at the foundation. She brought her children on weekends, their laughter echoing through the narrow hallways. One day, I found her arranging books by author instead of subject. It feels more personal this way, she said. People read names before ideas. You sound like your mother, I told her. She smiled, half proud, half wistful. Life had taken a gentler shape. The bitterness that once lived beneath my ribs had dissolved into something softer, acceptance perhaps. Age hadn't stolen my strength. It had simply redirected it inward. One afternoon, Nadia approached me with a folder. "We've been invited to expand the foundation to another district," she said. "It'll mean more work, more oversight. I can't do it alone." "Then you won't," I replied. "Faisal's been looking for a purpose beyond profit. He'll help." She raised an eyebrow. "You trust him with that?" I smiled. Trust grows when it's watered. Let's see how far it spreads. That evening, I told Faisal about the proposal. He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll do it. Not for the recognition. Just to build something real." Watching him say it, I realized how time had sculpted us both. We had traded suspicion for collaboration, inheritance for creation. A few weeks later, the new branch opened. I sat on a bench at the back while Nadia gave her speech. She thanked donors, volunteers, and finally, the man who reminded us that generosity can rebuild broken stories. The audience turned to me. I waved, embarrassed, but inside I felt a quiet joy bloom. After the ceremony, Sarah came to sit beside me. "Abba," she said softly, "do you ever regret it, giving away so much?" I thought about that. The house was smaller now, the car older, the bank account modest, but my life felt wider than ever. "No," I said. "I only regret waiting so long to see what really matters." She squeezed my hand. "Then maybe you've given us more than money after all." That night, back home, I lit the small brass lamp Amira had loved. Its flame wavered, steadying as the wind calmed. I opened my journal one last time. We chase permanence in numbers and forget that meaning lives in moments. When I'm gone, I hope they remember laughter in the library more than the figure in my ledger. The next morning, I delivered the journal to Nadia. "Keep it," I told her. "Maybe one day the students will read it and know who built these walls." She held it carefully, as though it were made of glass. "You'll be here to tell them yourself," I laughed. "Perhaps. But words travel further than breath." Years blurred quietly. The foundation grew. Faisal took charge of operations, and Sarah led the education wing. They visited often, but not out of duty anymore. Our dinners were filled with ordinary warmth, the kind that doesn't need ceremony to prove its sincerity. One evening, my grandson, little Ayan, sat on my knee and asked, "Dada, why do people say you gave all your money away?" I chuckled. "Because they don't understand that I traded it for something better." "What's better than money?" I pointed to him. "You," he grinned, satisfied with the answer only children can find complete. When they left that night, the house didn't feel empty. It felt full of echoes, of footsteps that promised return. I sat by the window, listening to the same wind that once sounded lonely and now hummed like an old friend. Outside, the lights of the library glowed faintly in the distance. It stood as a quiet testament, not to wealth lost, but to love rediscovered. I closed my eyes, whispering to the darkness, "Amira, they finally learned." And in that stillness, I could almost hear her laughter mingling with the night air.